Today, I've got a very special episode of TRBM for you. This is me being interviewed by the talented and wonderful Michelle Rado. She agreed to swap chairs with me on my own podcast to talk a little bit about the 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi for those of you who listen and wonder about the book. This will be maybe a treat to hear some of the behind-the-scenes stories about how the book came to be, what's inside of the book, how you can write novels, what it feels like to be in the middle of a lot of confusion. I am so grateful that Michelle agreed to interview me on my podcast. It's a little bit of an unconventional idea. I had the idea because of Brad Listy. He wrote a book, Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, and he had a friend of his interview him on his podcast about the book he wrote. And I thought, that's a great idea. Find somebody I admire and let them grill me for a change. So I hope that you enjoy this show. As always, you can buy copies of my book in any format. And on that note, at the end of this episode, after the closing music plays, you can hear me sharing a pronunciation file with my audiobook reader, XE Sands. I tacked it on after the music because it's not required listening. I mean, shoot, none of this is required listening. But if you just want to hear what's going on in the production of the audiobook, maybe you'll get a little bit of a sense of my playfulness, because a lot of the words that XE was curious how to pronounce have something to do with the wordplay inside of the 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi and the rest of the Luke and Time mysteries. If you notice that I sound especially sultry right now, it's because I have a bit of a cold. Sometimes I wish I could keep the kind of timbre that I've got right now without being all congested. Hope this finds you extremely well, and I look forward to talking with you again later.
If you've ever watched an author read in public and felt bored, TRBM is the antidote. TRBM is for writers what time-lapse was for painters, guitar solos and spotlights were for bands, what chainsaws and ice blocks were for sculptors. What does TRBM stand for? The risky and bumbling memoirist? Tangentially reverent Bible magnate? That renowned Bangor man? You decide. On one hand, I can say yes, but on the other hand, I go, oh, is that what I'm doing? Like, honestly, yeah. I sometimes I don't even know. And talking about that internal to external guidance thing, I have tried to kind of forget about everybody else and only say, what do I need to know in order to write what I'm hoping to write? And what book helps kind of show me in that direction how to do that? And then I talk to that person, and then I feel very like the bumbly sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like revealing all that I don't know. Like that is kind of, I don't try to do that. It is just what happens. And I do have a certain willingness to say, there's so much stuff I don't know. And how are we going to find out all the stuff that we want to know if we don't know unless we ask someone? And so in a funny way, your podcast and your conversations with writers, I find I could give the same description that you just gave to me. I feel like you're very on brand. You talk with these writers. You have these very specific things. I learned so much from talking, from hearing you talk with writers about things that I go, oh, that's interesting. And with that, and I even recall one conversation you were having with someone, I'm not going to remember who, where you were saying you have such a, I'll use the word, because it may come into play later, a ravenous appetite to learn, everything. And so you are trying to learn everything, and I am trying to learn one thing. I'm trying to learn I feel like I'm trying to learn memoir and I'm trying to learn how to tell my story.
Hmm.
But the part that I love about both of our explorations
Yeah.
is that it's all about writing. Like to me, I think that the writing is the the secret sauce. It's like
Hmm.
figuring out how to write is actually figuring out how to do all those other things we want to do.
Yes.
Does that kind of
Yes.
feel? Yeah.
And that's the absolute truth. And it's this place that I'm most comfortable in when I'm wrestling with the writing. Instead of trying to harness all the other things, you have these moments, and I'm positive you've experienced it before. Being in the flow when you're writing is unlike any other kind of flow. There's this sense of complete presence with the moment
Yeah.
where you know you you've maybe fallen asleep watching a TV show before or something like that.
Oh,
But
yes.
I have something really close to that while I'm writing, that there are many, many times where I dive in and I'm just in the creative process. And it's not when I'm editing, and it's when I kind of have a clear sense of what I'm doing, that it's dreamlike. And I wake up
Mm,
later almost and I'm just like, oh, I should have a bite to eat or move around a little bit. What a strange thing writing is, but it's the
yeah.
center of so much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell. I can
Yeah.
tell. And I love it. And I love how you explore it. And I love how it is your journey and that you're
Yeah.
sharing that.
I am curious, before we jump into the reverse interview, I want to know from you, because you have years in public radio and so much knowledge. What do you feel like was the difference when you pivoted to having full ownership of a show, as opposed to being
Mm,
a piece of a show? What did it
wow.
unlock, and what didn't you expect?
Oh God. Like pretty much everything in a bizarre way and in a wonderful way and in a scary way.
Mhm.
I will say kind of the baseline answer to that question is it freed me up to, and I hesitate to say such bold statements. It freed me up to feel like a writer.
Hmm.
I had been writing throughout
Mhm.
my radio time. I was a producer.
Mhm.
Um, I wrote a lot of on-air promos, so I was like a copywriter
Yeah.
person, and I struggled with it so much.
Hmm.
I would say I kind of hated it. I tried to lean on other people to do it. Um, I would be like, what people would send me notes about, the blah 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 event is coming up and what are we
Mhm.
gonna do? And you just I would find myself reaching for like these hacky lowest hanging fruit phrases and I'd go,
Mhm.
and I just struggled with it. And I was like, I hate writing. But when I would write a letter to somebody or I would write in my journal or
Mhm.
I had a thought about maybe writing memoir at some point. That it's sort of not as intense as the flow state that you described, but much more so where
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're like, you hit on one thing. And in my case, I'll go, oh, I have so much I need to say. I have to explain this whole thing before I can get to the one thing that I'm trying to tell you. And then,
Yeah.
like 6 pages later, I get to that story and then it leads me to some other tangent. And I was like, wait, I think I'm a writer.
Yeah.
That's when I felt the identity
Mm.
of writing because I was free to explore the content and the even means to whatever I wanted to say, which was all about me. And that
Yeah.
sounds so self-involved. I guess it is, but like I feel like
Cool.
figuring me out
Mhm.
has been part of the journey.
Yeah. That's
And
fantastic.
yeah, that's at least one tiny part. I don't know if you have any other questions about like the public radio part because I know I was going to say one other thing about the production side,
Mhm.
which I was thinking about just today or fairly recently. Because I actually had it slipped into my conversation with Brad Listy that I
Ah,
had
yes.
just a week or so ago, thanks to you. So when I also was working in radio, if I interviewed someone for something. And it usually would be, again, often it was for a promo. Sometimes I produced features. So sometimes it was that. Sometimes it was to produce campaigns. So like I would talk with a host or a reporter, and I'd have interview a whole bunch of reporters about a theme that we were going to promote or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I was interviewing someone, it was 100% clear I would never be in the final product. So I got very good at production and at getting answers from people of what I knew I needed, and getting the people I was talking to say what I needed them to say, because I knew how I would put it together. I was terrible at asking questions because I, first of all, was told from very early in my radio days that I was not an on-air voice and I would never be an on-air voice, and you should not think that you're going to be on air.
Oh, okay. Full pause right there, because I was
also about 20 years old, by the way. So
okay. Yeah.
But still.
Wow. My wife and I were driving up to get her grandma's recycling today. And we're driving up, and I was talking about the interview with you and saying, I'm oddly feeling nervous. I don't almost ever feel nervous anymore for interviews, whichever side of the mic that I'm on, but I was today. But I was saying that your voice is the quintessential public radio voice. I swear the tone of your voice is. So that's really funny that I would have never known that. So
no, I was not going to be on the radio. I did. So there were, early on, I love production and I love documentary. I love storytelling. So that's another sort of through line. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to eventually get into documentary production. So we did do a show once for like a college station. It aired on my station, and I was the host, but I was a scared little girl who was saying these things that I sounded awful. And so it was very early. And so rightfully so, they were like, no. And I had no interest in it and talk about being nervous. I still get nervous before every single interview, no matter what, because of that very thing. Like go, am I going to ask this right? Is it going to keep going? I always have awkward pauses. How am I going to keep it? And I've been become so adept at cutting myself out. So now I am doing the exact opposite of that. And I suddenly have become the voice. And I will say it's one of the things that is very hard in a live setting, to keep it all going so smoothly. Yeah. But the thing that I have really come to embrace and love is this, again, sounds terrible. I love my voice. Like I don't say I love my voice, but I have become very comfortable with my voice. Yeah. And I enjoy talking. So like when you hear the top and tail of my podcast, that's to me the ooh, that's the good stuff. Like I love thinking about what I'm going to say, figuring out how I'm going to say it, getting on the mic by myself. I can do it as many times as I want and nobody's going to notice. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. So the production side is one thing, and it just gave me gazillions of hours of practice of that stuff. Yeah. But being on air and doing the question and being the voice, not so much. So that's the challenge part. And the writing part is also like, okay, once the topic changed to something that I was really interested in, I mean, isn't that kind of what they say about writing? Like, write what you know or write what you want to know.
Right.
And a lot of the things I was just not so interested in.
Yeah, there's a really good bridge right here, because you had your conversation with Brad. We've both read and love his book. Both of us will recommend it to anybody that we meet. It's a phenomenal piece of literature. He calls it a novel. It really feels like a memoir. I think he kind of wrestles with that himself, and that idea of what we fictionalize and how true memory really is for us. What interested me about what you were saying is that idea of doing the interview and then cutting yourself out of the interview. And I'm curious, based on your recent conversation, having read Brad's book, and then interviewing a fiction writer right now, how much do you feel like you are actually still creating your brand, even when you're not the personality front and center? Do you feel like the shows that you produced on, this is another way of asking the same question, do you feel that those shows bore the mark of you as a person?
My public radio work?
Yeah.
Some. I could for station events, those kind of promos, sometimes I had to just get stuff done, and I didn't really feel. I mean, I do think that the challenge that I did feel constantly was to infuse the brand or creativity of the station through my interpretation of that. Like, that was sort of the creative part that was fun. And there were many campaigns that I did that were like station imaging sorts of campaigns that I would work with other people to come up with the idea, but then the execution would be me. And I liked a lot of multi-voice things. And the one thing that I did that I am super proud, not the only thing I'm proud of, but one of the things I'm super proud of was that is perhaps the only through line between my radio work and what I'm doing now. At one point, for the news station, because I worked it was both news and classical. For the news station, I started noticing the directive to listen. And obviously with a radio station, what you want people to do is to listen. And so I started trying to listen to the station and pull any clip I ever heard where anyone talked about what it means to listen. And I interviewed all the reporters. What does it mean to listen? And the tagline for the campaign was keep listening, because it had that little double entendre, like we were a local news station, and we wanted people to listen, to listen to what is being offered about our world and make up your own mind, not trying to persuade, but to offer. So that was very much me. I was really proud of that campaign, and it had several iterations, and then it had this phase where it was a bunch of sound bites of on air, and then the reporter things, and then it had some other phase I can't even remember now. But yeah. So, and that's, as you know, at the end of every episode, I say, thanks for daring to listen, because I still think that that's an important thing about our world, listening.
Yes. And I love the setup, because daring to tell is it's actually, I didn't realize until just this moment how very close it is to how I end my show. What's the point of telling stories? Nobody's listening.
I like that very much. Yeah, I know. I was happy to get a chance to read it. I was like, that's perfect.
So we'll get on to the reason that I invited you to be on here. But I'm still interested in one more just little piece of this, because, and this is really just me chasing my own interest in the last couple of weeks that I've had. I am fascinated right now with this idea of brand and everything you've been talking about. And I'm wondering, do you think that it's the best idea to not really worry about creating a brand, and to instead check in with yourself and say, am I doing what I should be doing right now? Am I in the place that I should be? And let the rest kind of take care of itself. Does that seem like the way to approach it? Or how would you respond to that notion?
Yeah. I very much agree with you about that notion. Like, I don't think I've thought about brand, honestly. I mean, but like you, I have thought about platform, I guess, another one of those words I don't really, we don't want to have to think about platform and brand. But if you think about it as who you are and what you have to offer, and how the more you keep doing a thing, there's going to be a whole lot of common denominators about you. And so It's funny that you say about my brand, because I honestly don't know what my brand is. Like, is
Yeah.
it Daring to Tell? I mean, I don't even know how I got. Uh, well, I do. It's funny because I always say that. I know I wrote it down in one of my journals, and it was, I think, in 2015. And I have a vague, you know how sometimes you have those like little snapshot images of where you
Hmm.
were when you were thinking of something. And I'm
Yeah.
picturing like the harbor walk in Charlestown where I would run in the mornings. And I can picture right where I was, where I was like, daring to tell. Like, I don't know why it popped in my head, but it
Hmm.
did. And it obviously stuck, which many things don't.
Yeah.
And it was enough that I wrote it down. And I thought maybe someday I'll have a podcast and I'll call it Daring to Tell. And I couldn't imagine, like, I was working at the radio station full time. I had no time to
Hmm.
barely do much of anything, as you know. Like, I
Yeah.
would try to write on the weekends, but I would always be tapped out after, working a lot. And you
Yeah.
have a family to boot. Have never had any kids, but anyway, yeah. So the brand, is it Daring to Tell? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly don't know that I could verbalize, but just like I said at the head of the show, is there's a real clear sense when I come to your show that you're clear in some way about what you're doing. It's very
Mm.
clear. And I will say, there are only a couple of podcasts that will do this to me. I recently listened to The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, and I was amazed
Oh
by
yeah, I
that.
heard you
And okay,
mentioning
yes,
that. Yeah, a little
wildly,
bit. I don't know it,
yeah.
but yeah.
No. So the show itself was just the host. She was so compellingly clear that, and this is part of my own thought process right now, is I don't think she was front and center of the podcast at all, but I think anything else that she ever did, I would run to listen to it because she's clear. I
Mm,
think it's the same
yeah.
thing with you, is that you have this mood that you create and this way that you'll put my brain into a thought space that I'd follow you wherever you went. Any kind of creative project you put out, I would read it, I would listen to it.
Oh.
And I think that's the sign of good brand. And it's something that I
Mm,
long to do myself because I want to write these detective books. Uh,
yeah.
but I have a very similar to Brad Listy's book, kind of a memoir with some fictionalized bits as well in it. And I want to be able to run all
Mhm.
over and do a lot of things and not have professional carnage behind me because nobody can ever keep up with all the different stuff I want to do, you know?
So what? Do what you want to do. I mean,
Right.
there is going to be a you. It makes me think of I can't remember who said the quote. This is why I it's why I keep a journal. It's why I can't.
Yeah.
This is why I record things, because I never remember anything. But
Yeah.
I do recall it. I feel like it might be John Lennon. I'm not sure. But if you try to copy someone doing
Hmm.
something, it's gonna, like, if he's gonna try and sound like Elvis,
Hmm.
he still ultimately is John Lennon.
Yeah.
Like, the voice is going to be him, no matter who we try and imitate. And we imitate the people who we love and who speak to us for whatever
Hmm.
reasons that they do.
Yeah.
But there's something then reflective back within you that is
Yes.
what it is. And it's interesting because it goes back to that like voracious appetite thing that I think
Hmm.
that you have, that you clearly are aware of too, that you want to do a whole bunch of things, but you have a passion for this
Yeah.
detective story stuff. And
Yeah.
I love hearing you want to do a memoir, because I hear you talk about your life a lot. And
Yeah.
so I get a real sense of you and clarity and um desire for achieving something. That's a little different
Hmm.
than um me, which I feel like is a desire to understand something. I
Hmm.
don't know, is that at the core of what I'm trying to figure out? And I know you're trying to do something, and you really want to make a mark. Like,
Yeah.
part of me goes, don't look. Like, so often I just shrink from
Mm.
wanting to be noticed, which is maybe goes
Yeah.
back to that, like, I never was the voice. That worked very well for me. So
Hmm.
the being noticed part is a little hard,
Yeah.
even though there's a part of it I like, there's a part of it that's hard. Anyways, I'm kind
Hmm.
of mixing all these things.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
show I have coming out tomorrow is largely on that topic of why is there this push pull of I clearly want people to know me and
Yeah.
to enjoy me.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned earlier that idea of like self-indulgent, or that's not exactly the term you used. I don't see anything inherently wrong with wanting that. I think that that's what it is, I guess, to be human, maybe, is to want to be
Yeah.
understood, that
Mm-hmm.
understand ourselves. And I think that when someone else understands something about us, I think that it serves as confirmation that we can see that our senses aren't just scattershot out there, I guess.
Yeah.
But I hate. I had to coach little league baseball yesterday because the coach wasn't going to be able to be there, and I told the other guy who asked me to help out. I said I will be horrible at this, and he said, "Well, it's really just glorified babysitting." And I said, "No, I'm going to be horrible at it. This is for some reason put me in a situation like that, and I turn into the most awkward." Out of place. Like I can throw a baseball, but for some reason I was so socially awkward that when I tried to
Yeah.
throw a baseball back to the coach, it's just like way out there. And I'm like, why?
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
it is interesting, isn't it? Like put
yeah.
us in different circumstances and there's reasons why we'll be awkward in some and just completely
At home.
relaxed in
Yeah.
others. What do you think it is about the baseball that like what's your discomfort with it?
There's a couple of things, and this is true of me. Is I am not a fan of children, as much as I hate to say that, and I love my kids,
Yeah.
but I even had a really hard time connecting with my own kids before they could converse. It was a real effort. So that
Really?
element, yeah, I'm
Wow.
not sure. I'd love to
Yeah.
explore why that is, but it's also something. It's something about somebody else setting an agenda and me stepping into the unknown that is deeply uncomfortable for me. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's at the heart of most social anxiety that I have. Because we went out for a friend's 40th birthday party over the weekend. And even there, it was like, I don't know what to say. I suddenly feel just completely clammed up and trapped. And I don't understand it to a large degree because I feel like if I did, I could work on it. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I know. It is interesting. I mean, there's that control thing certainly in whatever circumstances,
Yeah,
and the words thing is interesting to me, Jody, because you're a man of words.
I know.
Words are your domain. They are your,
Yes.
and so when babies don't have words, how will you
Yes.
converse?
I
I don't know.
I've
It's an
never thought of that
interesting.
before. Wow. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, well, so let's jump
Yeah.
in.
Can
I'm
I
going
ask?
to
Yeah. You go. You tell me.
all I was going to say is from this point forward, I'm going to let you drive it like it's your podcast. So I will, and then when you tell me we're wrapping up, we'll wrap up from here because that gives you the freedom to do what I asked you to do. And I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for reading my book so that you could do this, because I realized even when I was preparing today, I didn't give you much of a heads up of the content of the book, and you could have found it violently offensive. And I had that moment where I was like, wow, well, I guess I trusted that at the heart you knew who I was enough. If you were offended, we could just have a civil conversation.
Well, that is an excellent starting point. Let's launch off with that.
Yeah.
Let's not launch off with that actually, because
Yeah.
you said something else that to me was a good bridge, which is you really want to tell these detective stories.
Yeah.
So that was going to be one of my first sort of like, let's set the table questions. Like, what's the passion for detective? Tell me about the 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi.
DeLong High. So like
DeLong
the
High.
long
Yeah.
high. Yep, DeLong High. So
Okay.
The truth is a little bit just I'm lacking the exact word I want, but it was from the sense that I had written some books. I started out with that book I was telling you about that was kind of memoirish, and I couldn't find any interest in the world for that kind of book from a no-name author. And so I really started to think about the kinds of things that I felt like I could write that might have more commercial appeal. And I knew that I really enjoyed the work of James Lee Burke and Raymond Chandler and there was also this amazing book called Gun with Occasional Music by Jonathan Latham that I just thought those are amazing works. And I think that I can do something kind of like that and I'll enjoy it, because there had to be a bridge to enjoyment. The answer in a bigger way is that once I got into the head of Luke, I suddenly realized that I could use a human being that I created to question myself about the things that I believed. And Detective is like doubling down on that. Anything that I believe, I can create a character who believes the exact opposite thing and start to converse with her and say, how do you see the world that's different than me? If you've not done it before, I don't know that you... I think a lot of people would say that this is just science, like neurons fire, you can't be two people. But so far as I can tell, she's not me. She thinks very different things than I do. And I can just talk to her. It's weird.
Right. Well, so this is one thing I find very interesting whenever I listen to any fiction writer talk about creating their characters. And I've heard you say similar-ish things when you've talked. I've heard you talk about your protagonist, Luke Mia, right? Yep. Detective Luke Mia. Yep. And it makes me, as you say that, it reminds me, I think on the other conversation we had, or maybe it was on your podcast. Anyways, you said another prior time, something about how you created a Twitter account for a character and you would tweet questions and things. Was Luke...
Luke is the one.
Can I expose you?
Yes, I did expose myself. So people do know she's out there now. But it was her. And
how did that go? What was that like? Like, what did people did you learn things? Like, was it weird? Because I remember thinking, that's, see, this is where I think we're very different. Like, how could you pretend to be someone else? That is not ethical, Right. And I love, I'll just say that you're always so open to debating people and having a different point of view. You are willing to listen, dare I say. So, so tell me more about Luke and how you met her and the spark and how she kind of like came to be.
So much there. Okay. So as far as the character, I may have said this in different places, so I won't tell the long story, but I had a friend in college. I was kind of late going to undergrad, so I was 25, I think, at the time. And I was in my very fervent religious period. I was fervently a Christian, and I had a classmate who said, I dare you to write a character who believes exactly the opposite of you. And she did not end up being my character for a long time after that, but it was in my brain. I'll always remember that conversation. And so when she came around, I tried to create somebody. And when I say the exact opposite of me, even before I wrote Luke, I think that I was a feminist in the sense that I believed in equal rights for men and women. But I also believed that I was steeped in a culture that told stories about women being in submission to men, and those narratives that I'd heard for a long time. So I wanted to write a woman who was like, screw that. I'm in submission to no one. I have my own agency. I'm my own person. And see, could I do this authentically? So she comes about in that way, and I start writing her book, and I know I want to get an agent. And so I think I was really uncomfortable with social media at the time. And I thought, I can hide behind her. I can create a social media account as Luke. And then I can also pitch that as being, hey, look, I wrote this book and I have this social media account that has X thousand followers. And that will be a stepping stone for me to jump out in the world and do something interesting. What I found from just the simplest things was that after being her on Twitter for a period of time, when I searched to respond to somebody with a GIF, I would always look for a woman, because I thought, if I'm a woman, then I'm going to identify with the GIFs of women in embodying these things. And then it became so second nature to me that when I was on Twitter, I even when I switched over to my own account, I had to remind myself, I'm me. I'm not Luke anymore.
Right.
I did want to stop to one thing that you mentioned, because I think that it's really important, and I would not want anybody to feel like I should definitely do what Jodi did and create their character as the profile. I stepped into friendships with a few people that were vulnerable with me in a way that I got a little bit concerned that I had done somebody wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a woman talk about a relationship with her boyfriend, and I was able to just say from a human perspective, you deserve better than that. But
Yeah.
I knew
Yeah.
I had crossed the line that I never
Yeah.
meant to cross.
Right. Wow.
So ethics are a strange thing. I went back to 4 people on Twitter from my profile and let them know. I said, "Hey, you might be angry at me about this." At the time, I didn't know I was doing anything that I would have an issue with.
Wow.
And 2 of them were upset, and they had
Yeah.
every right to be. So
Yeah.
I wish that there was a way that you could do that and
Yeah.
not have the other consequences, because there were actual consequences. And then a 5th person, I tried to let them know, and it was almost as if this was a guy. He had been occasionally flirtatious, and I'd always sort of,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I tried to tell him, and he wouldn't accept that what I was saying was that, like, I am Luke. And
Right.
so I had a side conversation, and somebody just said, you don't need to speak with him anymore, but just, he believes what he believes, and it's okay. You haven't
Right.
hurt him in any way, so just let it be.
Right.
What a strange, there were
Yeah.
consequences for real.
Wow. Well, kudos to you for that. No, I mean, that's really something to admit that and to sort of be transparent about what happened. Because, yeah, I mean, that is a little intense. And obviously, your intention was not to hurt anyone. And I don't know, social media is very difficult that way. I mean, I do think that people become vulnerable because of the veil that exists.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a tough one. Well, thanks for saying that, because that's interesting to know. But so that is something else that informs your whole experience as you go forward, as well as, I mean, that's also to be a woman in that setting. I mean, I think to decide to write from a different gender perspective also is really challenging. I can't imagine that. So I really give you credit for that too. And one of the things that I think is interesting as I hear you talk about what you do, it is this flipping back and forth between what I want and what everyone else wants. I'm going to say everyone else, like what a readership may want, what an agent may want, what the market wants. And so I think that's it's a difficult thing to straddle, how to be true to yourself while trying to do something that will be commercially viable, which obviously detective stuff is huge. I mean, I can do, so a little bit of background on me about detective stuff. I think that I've mentioned before in places, I don't know. I volunteer at a used bookstore that is in our town that's affiliated with the library. So when I first started there, I mean, it was really my first job ever besides working at the radio station. I mean, I had done that for so long, and I was a co-op student. So I had started at the radio station as a co-op student. So I spent my entire
That's unheard of. So many people don't
do that anymore.
It really
is. I know. I was embarrassed about it for a great amount of time, but now that it's over, I go, okay, yeah. I mean, I'm proud of it. I am.
You
proud
should
of it.
be.
Anyways, thank you. So it was weird. Like, I'm working in a different place. So to work among books, I was very excited, and I really wanted to learn. And in our bookstore, it's a really very big bookstore, and we have fiction, we have classics, we have short stories, we have a whole bunch of nonfiction, we have memoirs and true stories and biography, blah, blah. But we also have an entire room designated to mystery. And I was like, oh, I know nothing about any of these books at all. And people would come in and they would go, do you have any Louise Penny? And I'd go, who? So again, sort of that naivete thing that I can't fake. And they're like, oh, you don't know Louise Penny? I mean, so my knowledge of the mystery section was, okay, I'm in Maine. I know Stephen King.
Yeah.
I've even read Stephen King. before I moved here. And John Grisham, I was a big Grisham guy for a while, but I think that's kind of it. I might have read one or two Scott Turow books. So I'm curious to hear who your passions were in the detective genre. Unfortunately, I can't comment on it.
Oh yeah,
because I haven't read them. But what are they like? And so there is something about detective that is clearly resonant with you, and that you do have passion about. So how did you? So you got Luke. You were deciding to try and be something that was very much not you, which I think is it's that learning part. I'm going to learn how to be someone who's not me, and I'm going to create her.
Yep.
And then, how did you get the whole story?
So I think the most important author that I tried to emulate as much as I could, and he unlocked something for me, was Dennis Lehane. So he writes
a Boston guy, right?
Yeah, he's a Boston guy. Yeah. So the one that probably most people know is Gone Baby Gone. He also wrote Mystic River, Shutter Island. Those were made into films. But where he caught me was early in the series with Gone Baby Gone in it. So it starts with, and I sometimes get the two titles mixed up, but A Drink Before the War. I think it's the first one. And it's Patrick and Angie, and they are detective partners. And the banter between the two of them was unlike anything that I'd ever read. So I do tend to prefer novels where there's some element of romantic tension somewhere. I'm not sure why. I can't really comment on what's important about that for me, but I want there to be a love interest in the stories that really grab me. And I think that he did such a good job of having just a hint of romantic tension through the first 3 books before you really kind of get them to actually be together. And that
was a really slow build.
It was a slow build. And I loved it so much. And I loved their relationship. And I loved the idea that they could almost be platonic at times, and then enemies in one of the books for a great part of Sacred. I think it's in Sacred. They're kind of like enemies. And I thought, this tells me more about life than I've learned anywhere else. And I wanted so badly to emulate that. But also the way that they investigated, the way that Angie approached problems, to me at least, read very much like a woman would approach a problem. And the way that Patrick approached problems felt very much like the way that I would. I could like see myself in his behaviors. And so
what did Angie do that made you feel?
Ooh, okay. So these things are harder to verbalize, but in fact, that's such a good question. Feels really hard for me to answer because I don't want to stereotype. But Angie was self-conscious in a way that I don't see men being. She questioned her motivations much more than he did. And she was angry at herself for being vulnerable. And that was the way that she approached cases. It was almost like she notices that she feels vulnerable to something, and that clues her in to the heart of the mystery, I guess.
Right.
And so seeing her do that, I think, was just revelatory for me. So
that was it. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because actually to be a woman detective, I think I'll say would feel very vulnerable. I mean, I can see some advantages to it in certain scenarios, as I think Luke finds herself in, but I also don't want to give any spoilers away. I have not finished it yet. I was listening to your episode with Chris Talon, who I also very much enjoy, and you guys have a great rapport. He had said the same thing. He said it when I was like maybe through, well, we know there are many lives. So maybe through like life 7 or 8 or something like that. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not going to finish it either. So I don't know the end yet. And I don't want to spoil it, but I do think that Luke is like, she has to be tough, and anyways, I'm getting a little off track. You were talking about, we were talking about the genre and how you decided detective, and the slow build of the relationships. Because when you were starting saying, I was like, I'm not sure if we can reveal how much there may or may not be between Luke and her partner Lyle, who is a very interesting character.
Yeah. I love writing him.
Yeah. So okay, I'll just jump around, I guess, unless I kind of cut you off in the middle of explaining something. But like, how about Lyle? Because let's hear who your characters are in this book.
Yeah. So Lyle Kopachnik, there's a couple of things that are really fun about Lyle. Just nobody can pronounce his name correctly,
Right,
which I have so much fun with.
Yeah.
It's partly me, even though my name is Jody, like people will refuse to believe that I'm a guy named Jody. So you'll have people just do all of these strange ways of trying to change the pronunciation, or is that a nickname? Is it short for Joseph? And no, that's my name.
See. Gymnastics against the obvious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lyle was a side character in the book that I wrote for grad school that I couldn't find an agent for. He was the main character's childhood best friend. And so I wanted to have some continuity, but I thought it was funny because he was a very unrealistic character in that book. And I wanted to see what would happen to him if he grew up. So I think of like Kramer from Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
And how I played around with him, and he's always eating. I got my first 1-star review yesterday, which was really fun. And the lady cited, she's like, "There's this one character who just annoys me terribly. He's always eating." And I was like, "Well, you got me." That's what he's doing.
That's what he does. Well, I was gonna say, as someone who struggles with GI issues from time to time, I was like, I'm getting a stomach ache listening to Lyle and everything that he is eating. I'm like, he's constantly eating. But then I had a brilliant idea for you, for your merchandising.
Ooh, yes.
With the book. You should have the Lyle Kopachnik. Am I saying it right now?
You did. You got it.
Lyle Kopachnik snack line. Like you could sell all kinds of everything that he's eating all the time. I mean,
that's perfect.
Wouldn't that be good?
It would be.
There you go. That one's free.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
So okay. So Lyle is always eating. Their partners. They're going to they meet Marva, who comes in, and there's this many lives aspect of it. And so is it fair to say sci-fi is kind of like a fringe influencing genre too?
Yeah, so it's a lot of people from my background call it speculative. Yeah, in sci-fi fantasy, either way, you're dealing with something that's magical. So there's magical realism, there's speculative, there's sci-fi, fantasy, all of those genres, I think, have influences in what you do because, you're stepping outside of, hey, when you die, you're dead. And instead you start back over and you get more tries for whatever reason it might be behind that. Yeah. And that's been an interesting one because that would be, other than Jonathan Latham, who wrote Gun with Occasional Music, I've not run into a mystery that's done exactly what I'm doing in terms of blending really hard-boiled style with the speculative or the magical.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. And that is a good, so I was curious because I frequently am coming across writing books, and you got an MFA in writing. So you did the whole school thing. And I was curious, you mentioned college too. Were you like a English major or lit major or?
So I got my bachelor's of fine arts with fiction focus. And then I went on to get my master's of fine arts with a fiction focus. So it was all about fiction.
Do you have like a craft book that is a favorite, or do you have people who you especially love, or because you obviously speak with so much background and knowledge about all of that, which again, I'm like, bleh.
Yeah, it's so there's a couple. My friend Joseph Salvatore has, and it's an expensive one, but he actually has a grammar book out that I think makes like things like diagramming sentences
Mm.
so much more approachable than you'd ever
Mm-hmm.
think. And so I love his academic approach to it. He wrote a great book of short stories called To Assume a Pleasing Shape. Soaking yourself in his writing, I think, does a lot for teaching you. But then, honestly, I would go with the classic. I think Elements of Style by Strunk and E.B. White is, I mean, you could read that and you just keep discovering new stuff. There's so much
Yeah.
depth and it's a really short volume. So those are
Right.
two off the top of my head that I think are
Mm-hmm.
great. Stephen King's On Writing has some amazing stuff in it as
That
well.
was, yeah. I mean, I have read other King. I
Yeah,
read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
I love that book. It's underrated for sure.
Yeah, it was very fun. I
Yeah,
still had trouble believing that what was she supposed to be 10 years old that she
I
could
know.
survive in the woods like that? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, he
But
does. He plays that game with children where you're like, yeah, they are
they
way
were,
more savvy than they should
yeah,
be. I have a
exactly.
10-year-old. He can't survive out in the front
Exactly.
yard.
Exactly. But his on writing was unbelievable. And actually, reading your book and listening to you frequently, because I know you're a huge Stephen King
I
fan,
am.
I was
Yes.
like, I got to read that again because it was so good. Well,
Yeah.
the book that I had come across recently, I will show you. I don't know
Ooh,
if we're going to be on YouTube or not,
genres. I am
but
going to
it's
put this one.
called, yeah,
The
it
Anatomy of
is
Genres.
so good. So I've barely cracked it, but I saw a webinar with this guy, John
Okay.
Truby, and it was eye-opening, especially for someone who has not gone to writing
Yeah.
school, who has not done an MFA. But he talks about genre, how the story form explains the way the world works. And he goes
Hmm.
through every genre and he ranks them
Um,
for what they, not in terms of, how
yeah.
good they are, but like
Yeah.
in what they address and what the sort of life accomplishment challenge is. And
Hmm.
I think horror is the lowest one because it's about survival. It's just
Hmm.
about trying to survive. And love is at the top because it's
Hmm.
about extension of self beyond self. But detective is the second to last. Like detective
Oh,
is
wow.
about knowing how the world works. So I was kind
Hmm.
of thinking of that as I was reading yours. And he was also talking about how some of the more successful works of literature and or genre
Hmm.
combine elements of genre. So that was why I was
Yeah.
thinking, and you're right about speculative. I've heard these terms, but
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
this is where I kind of go, I didn't go to school for this, but I
Right.
get it. So the speculative fiction, these lives repeat,
Hmm.
um, and it's a overlap of
Yeah.
a few different types of genres. And
Yeah.
beats is another thing. Do you count your beats and your
So
that
this
was
is,
one I learned from a recent writing class I took too.
yeah, it's evolving a little bit. I didn't even think about things like a three-act structure or how many acts I wanted to have
Mm.
originally. So I will say that the Nine Lives of Marva de Longhai specifically worked. I don't know what the fate of this book is yet. It's got a long, long road. It's a brand new book still
Mm-hmm.
in reality. Uh, I couldn't write anything plotty that worked and that people would be interested in the way that I wanted them to because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand how to make it happen. And so I had a one of my professors in grad school was mentioning have a structure like a week. And you know that you're going to tell the novel in a week and have
Mm.
every day or every chapter be a day. And then that very structure, that sense of having seven beats along the way helps you to understand where to place things like your climax, where to have the rising actions start to really ratchet up. It helps so much with pacing. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
actually, as much as anything, I implemented the nine lives on myself to say, now I know what has to be accomplished by when. And it was tremendously helpful. I've
Mm.
changed so much in the way that I write story now, but for the Nine Lives of Marva de Longhai, that may have been the biggest reason why I settled on that form.
That's very interesting because I can see how that sort of an overlay would help
Yeah.
propel the story forward. And again, I don't think this is a spoiler, but one thing I found very compelling and intriguing about it was how as she goes through these lives, some are very long and some
Yes.
are not. I mean,
Yeah.
that was pretty cool. I was like, wait, where are we now? What's
Yeah.
going on? How is it was sort of it was a little vertigo inducing
Yeah.
almost, which was really interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'll give a little some of the other things that I found most compelling about it were the big life questions that I think that it can become an analogy for of how to the chance to do something over and over until we can get it right.
Yeah.
And so that was a really is a really compelling because I'm still wondering what's going to happen. And the fact that I heard you read a chapter from your new book
Yeah.
already, I'm like,
Yep.
okay, well, she's still around.
Yeah.
That made me feel a little okay. We know that much.
Mhm.
It made me also think, and maybe I'm reaching here, but I don't know. How many times did you write this book?
Oh, yeah.
Because I've heard you say, like,
Yeah.
I like the idea of, you know what? I had to write through
Mhm.
it again and again. And this term pantser, which I had to look up because I'm like, what is this? So
Yeah.
it's basically writing through it until you figure out what your story is. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like you went into this knowing this is how
Yeah.
it's all going to get mapped out. You didn't have
Yeah.
that sense.
No, not at all. Yeah, like I said, the Nine Lives helped me to have some sense of how it was going to go. I had the title before I had that particular draft. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're right, and I don't want to rehash too much of anything that's already out there. But uh, I was formerly a pantser, and I thought that there would be nothing interesting if I knew how the story was going to end. And so
Oh,
I wrote a draft of the book that Lyle was the main character, and he was much more of a womanizer. He was, I think I had like accentuated his worst qualities to try to play with having like the ultimate feminist and the ultimate chauvinist pig. And I wanted to like
mm,
them to crash into each other because there is actually still something really fascinating to me about how if we know somebody well, we forgive a lot. We forgive a lot of
yes,
their worst parts because we know their
yes.
heart. And I thought, how amazing would it
Mm.
be to have a story where you had two people that shouldn't get along so well, but actually really work really well together. And I think I still have that in this format, but I wrote that whole draft out and it was nothing like the final book was. And I knew that it was ultimately a bit heartless. And um, so then when I did finally come upon the draft where I knew the nine life structure, uh, it still took me a couple of tries to really get the feel for who the characters were in a way that I wrote what I think is a good book. I'm really, really proud of it. I am for sure proud of it. It took a long time to figure it out. And at the pace that I wrote it, I could never make a living as an author. It took me 5 years. So,
Well, and that's another whole thing about a pace of writing,
yeah.
which Brad Listy and I touched on a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Honestly, the very
He's
end of our
the consummate
conversation.
long writer.
Oh God, I'll go into a slow contest with him. I feel like, but we'll
Yeah.
see. But it is funny because you're picking a genre where people kind of crank them out,
Yes. Yep.
and but you have a big picture plan for it. So,
Mhm.
but I think that also knowing that you wrote through it a few times to get to it, um, your learning curve might have been on the nine lives because
Yeah.
it seems like now you know them better and they're going to have their adventures that they'll continue to have.
Yeah.
um and I think that it's funny when you describe people who are different and can love and depend on each other
Hmm.
because of who they are in spite of their differences.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that is a brand right there. I mean,
Mm.
isn't it? It kind of
Yeah.
is. I mean, that's how I feel. That definitely is in the
There it is.
my copy.
Yeah.
See, I was like, wait, where are each
I love
where
it.
are all the lives?
Uh,
Um, so what was I saying about that? Yeah, like they they come together, they listen. Yeah, they listen to each other. They have they forgive each other's faults. And that was the thing. I'll maybe go into my own.
Yeah, I would love that.
I started this book, Jody, and I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
It's not, this is not the kind of book I would typically pick up.
Yep.
But I kept going because I wanted to know what was going to happen. And I see that. And so I told myself, Michelle, you're not typically a detective story person. Yeah. You're not typically like in the thriller, like violence realm.
Yeah, I was going to say it's graphically violent. The language is graphic. It's all extremely graphic.
It's intense. It's pretty intense. But I thought this is a fun read.
Yeah, hopefully.
Ha ha ha. So, but I like I say, I went with it. And I think again, I'll refer back to your conversation with Christopher Talon. The first hill is the biggest one. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And so luckily I put it down. Honestly, I put it down for a little bit.
Sure.
But I came back.
Yeah.
I came back just like Mia. I reappeared. And and they definitely grew on me. Lyle and all his food, and Mia and all her bourbon. And you know, it felt at that point it had a very fun noir-ish character to it. The characters were people who did grow on me, and I'm really curious to see what happens. So now I'm hooked. I can't wait to see the ending. So I'm glad we're talking because now I can go read it at the end.
Yeah. So I want one thing I really want to say, because I think that this will impact the way, and you probably know this anyways, but this will impact the way that a lot of people meet the book if they listen to this episode before they read the book, is I wrote this book truly believing that this was a one-off. I was not going to write these characters again. If they ever showed up again, it would be kind of like Carl Hiaasen, where they're a side character in someone else's story for just a moment. In fact, I even tried that. However, when I had my kind of epiphany moment at the end of year one of the podcast and, you know, having quit my job and all those things, it really did come down to utility. That's the word I was looking for before, is that I needed a way to make a living. And in order to do that, the just dollars and cents was have a series of books. So if people meet Luke and Lyle, they like them, they pick up book 2, they pick up book 3, and then you create a sense of propulsion where you have something to sell people. Right. So I love the book. If I'm going to be 100% honest, I will always love the book as a standalone, because it does not end on a cliffhanger, but it ends with a question. And I don't think that that's spoiling anything. There's going to be a question. You're going to be confronted with something to think about. And for me, that was what made the novel great. I think it's a good, fun read. I don't think it's for everybody, like you said. My grandma, I think, says she started to read it and she'll love me no matter what. But I was just like, please don't read this. I mean, in the most honest sense, it's not going to be your thing. And I know that.
You told her that.
I did. I said, I don't need you to read this. I'm happy that you want a copy. I gave her a copy. And then the last thing that I will say on that note is that in returning to Luke and Lyle and Mike Schatz and some of the other characters that you have met along the way, I discovered that it was bliss, and having new tools in my tool belt to tell the stories and outlining a big 9-book arc. Yeah. Wow. What unbelievable fun. Yeah, it's been rewarding.
I was going to say, I can definitely see the joy and enthusiasm in getting into, like, breaking into who they are, what's going to happen. I mean, it's like any good series, like thinking about Seinfeld, which I know like the back of my hand.
Yes.
You know, those characters, you know, it took a while for them to find their voices and their rapport and all that. So I think with any story, it's like, once you have the groove of it, run with it once you do, because you've really put in a lot of work. And the craft, also speaking of craft, I was my husband and I often at dinner, we sometimes listen to different, like, webinars or lectures of people. He's a
Yeah.
musician, and so we
Yes.
listen to musicians, and sometimes we listen to writers. So recently we were listening to Claire Keegan.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've read her.
Yeah.
She has I think the most recent book is called, oh God, I should have been ready for this. It's like The Small Things, something
Okay.
about the small things. It's very short. And so I thought it was, we were visiting someone, and she was
Hmm.
reading the book for a book club.
Hmm.
And so I thought, oh, it's fiction. I'll try this thing, because I can be
Yeah.
I call myself binary. I don't try to be
Hmm.
closed-minded. I just feel like I want to know it's real. And
Yeah.
and of course, like reading Nine Lives of Marva Delonkai, I mean, there's so much that is like, it tells a truth about humanity, about
I hope
life.
so.
And that's obviously like what great fiction does. So,
Yeah.
anyways, all of this to say, I decide to read this little wisp of a thing from
Hmm.
Claire Keegan. And she, in talking about her characters that she had created, she was being interviewed by someone else who was like going on and on and on and on. And he was saying something about I'm not gonna get this right now. Sorry. Let me
You're
gather
fine.
myself together. Um where did it was about the characters and who they were and the motivation that they were going to have, or what was the plan for them, or something about the headiness of it, I will say.
Yeah.
And she said, I learned about the characters from their gestures, essentially,
Yeah.
like the physicality of who they
Mm.
are and what they do.
Hmm.
Now, I heard that partway into reading your book, and all of a sudden, like, bing, 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 bing. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
and even before that point, by the way, I was like, I don't think I've read this many verbs in my whole entire life. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it is rich with action and visceral stuff. I mean, sometimes scary, but just
Mm.
alive, alive. And who they are and where they are and what they're doing, and who they are does create their character. So,
Mm.
like, was that I don't innate for you to do? You
Mm.
already knew this, or
There's I think two pieces to the question, and it's strangely insightful. So if I were going to be honest, it almost feels like my craft is not fully developed by the time the Nine Lives of Marva DeLonghi comes along, because you saw what I was doing. You really clearly picked up on it, using verbs instead of Luke said blah 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 blah, or Lyle said blah 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 blah.
Oh yeah.
Luke smoked a cigarette, and then boom boom. So I'll anchor you in the speaker by giving them a verb or an action, and that was my way of replacing dialogue tags. I didn't want to have any
Yeah.
dialogue tags so far as I could help it.
Right.
Yeah, so that was intentional, but it was because I didn't necessarily have multiple answers to a question. I think I do more so now than I did when I wrote that book. It's fun to evolve as a writer. There's something interesting about looking back at your old work and feeling there's something great there. And also, I so much wish I could do it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So I no, yeah, it partly is intentional. I want it to feel active. I want it to feel verby. I want it to feel fast paced in the language. Um, People who have been somewhat critical of the book have said it feels detailed. I
Hmm.
I would like to ask those people a little bit about what they mean when they say that, because both of them were not necessarily reading in my genre, but I do think that
Mm-hmm.
it's true that I'm packing sentences full of information. Uh,
Mm.
so, yeah,
Well, that's interesting, because that would, oops, excuse me,
you're
that would
good.
lead to the other craft book that has come into my attention recently that I don't know if you know of. It is called Several Short Sentences
No,
About Writing.
awesome.
This book is amazing. And if you're talking about sentences,
Mm-hmm.
that's his whole, that's the whole shtick. Again, all these books, I'm a little bit in. I am
Yeah.
like tiny bit into way too many books.
Yeah.
But if you even look at his prose on the page, and this is one thing we can talk about audiobooks too. Like, for example,
Yeah.
like it looks like a poem almost.
Yeah.
The way he writes, each phrase or sentence or phrase even is its own line. And it's remarkable to hear him talk in that way. And he reads his own audiobook.
Yes.
And so I was very much enjoying listening to him and also reading it. And sometimes I'll like listen to a book and then read it.
Yep.
I almost never will read a book and then listen to it.
Okay.
But this is the first book that I am reading and listening simultaneously. I'll be like, oh, I've caught up to where I was listening, or then I've passed where I read up to. It's kind of funny. But anyways, all that to say, sentences are also very interesting. And I wouldn't have said that you packed too much detail into, I mean, it's just very sensory rich, which I don't know if you can complain about that.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I do know that I'm coming from a literary fiction background, and literary fiction is really just slice of life. It's going to feel almost like a memoir with a little bit of a story in it. So if it won a Pulitzer Prize, it's probably considered literary fiction. That's sort of the way to describe the kind of books that it is.
Right.
So, and there are more details in literary fiction. So I think that I do bring that into whatever I'm writing. I have to think about pacing and going really fast. You mentioned John Grisham earlier. He is very capable of moving action with short, punchy sentences and just getting to the heart of things. And I still certainly don't know how to do that.
Well, I bet you will get there. I mean, you're at the beginning of something, and I will say, the more you bring yourself to it and the passion, you're following your passion, and that is, I think, the best and only thing that we can do when we're trying to make our way in the world. And I think the pace of it, to me, that's the big question. Are you a fast writer, or are you a slow writer, or a fast learner even? Maybe you're it seems like you're a fast writer and you adjust, but it took you a while to get there. And almost to go back to the very first thing that we were talking about brand and who we are and what we're trying to do, I think that there's so much advice out there for people who want to write, who want to make a living from writing, who want to, I don't know, do all these things, like have a podcast. I had a podcast because I had worked in radio for 30 years and it was the most obvious thing for me to do. So that felt like just the most natural thing to do. I think that you are a wonderful, wonderful host, talker, listener. You're curious. You listen. You want to debate things with people in a respectful way. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, really. And bringing that into what you write is the same thing. So all of that to say, you start and you try and get X number of followers on X type of platform, and then you do this, and then you say, I have to start somewhere, so I'm then gonna declare that this is my brand. And then you realize, oh, I guess it wasn't exactly that. And so I switch, and you go, you're not supposed to switch. And then you go, well, and you start becoming so self-aware of all the rules that you're breaking that you just got to go, meh, like I'm figuring it out. And you know what? I'm doing it. And I think that the more you do it and you learn the things you're good at and you learn the things you're enjoying, I mean, I kind of am one of those believers that often those things match up. Sometimes they don't. I think it was Verdi who was like, wrote operas that everybody loved, and he didn't really like writing opera. Poor guy. You know,
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm not really a big opera person per se, but I vaguely remember. Someone will tell me I got it wrong and it's somebody else. But anyways,
Yeah.
somebody didn't. So, blah blah blah.
I'm having a horrible brain fart right now because the guy who wrote James Bond, I've read all those books.
Oh,
I don't know why I can't think of his name right now, but he said the
oh
same thing.
yeah.
He would write one Bond book a year. He would go during the off season to a nice place for vacation, and he would pump out a Bond novel. And wow, those books are so great. They definitely show their time. If you go back and read them now, he had some worldviews that are probably not very flattering for him, but Bond himself is just a phenomenal character. I love him.
Yeah, yeah. See, and there's another, it's like I have so not gotten into
Yeah.
James Bond, but that's, we all like the things that we like. And
Yeah.
I've tried to watch those James Bond movies, and
Yep.
I don't know.
The books, I will say, in terms of if you were going to attempt, and I'm not saying that you should
Yeah,
or
yeah.
even
No, I
take a
hear
time,
you.
but the books far, 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 far better than the movies. Even I think probably the best Bond so far is Daniel Craig Daniel, the most recent one. But yeah, there's something about the books that
Hmm.
really get into it. There's one particular novel, I believe it might have been made into a movie, and is considered by a lot to be better than the rest. But James Bond walks into another woman's story. She's a server at a diner, kind of in a small town you might find in Maine. And there's some people who come in and end up taking her hostage and causing problems, and there's all kinds of violence, and Bond is there, and it's not, there's no espionage. It's just, how do we survive this moment where I happen to be in the
Oh,
wrong place at the wrong time?
right,
And
right, right.
it's amazing. It's a really, really, really good book.
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions. And did you have a basic question that you were pursuing through this Nine
Talking
Lives?
about Bond? No, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know. I'm curious.
No, do I have a basic question when I was writing the book, or
Yeah, like did you have an essence you were trying to get at through the story?
yeah, for the Nine Lives of Margaret DeLonghi, I really wanted to know uh, how far you could love somebody. And I know that that
Mm,
sounds trite, um, but it's also to this day the most important question in my life. And I think I'll keep asking it in different ways. Uh, Luke makes some really clear sacrifices for Lila along the way. I think if I've done my job even halfway, I think people will see the kinds of sacrifices she makes for him. Um, he makes sacrifices for her as well. And
mm.
there's something about, so my friend, she's been on the podcast a couple of times, Heather O'Brien. She's doing editing beta reading for my current novel. I've become fast friends with her, and she needed some help getting her book formatted, and I just happened to have some kind of, I know my way around formatting and everything, and getting what she needed. So I helped her get her most recent book so that they could upload it onto Amazon. And I wrote back and I said, there's something really amazing about having the opportunity to reciprocate. When somebody does something really
Yeah,
nice for you,
yeah.
I'm not the kind of person who's like, hey, I owe you one. And I would never feel like a friendship should be have any kind of ledger in it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, one of the truest expressions of friendship is the ability to give you something, and to reciprocate. I like the reciprocal. And so
Yeah,
if
yeah.
there's a question in these books, in Luke and Lyle, um, I think it would probably be how much can you pay, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's a big one. That is a really big one. I mean, these are the big questions that we
Yeah.
think about life, because some of the other ones, like I don't maybe I feel like I might have said this a little bit at an earlier point in our conversation, but how can we how can we get I think many people can identify with feeling trapped in a situation that you don't know how to fix.
Hmm.
And so the chance to start over and over and over and over,
Yeah.
um, and to try and figure it out. I loved seeing that puzzle being worked out. Um, and I think that it has everything to do with life and how we try to come back to ourselves and those we love.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I can't wait to read the end.
Yeah.
Jody, I
I hope you
am
like it.
very proud of you.
Thank you.
I mean, seriously, congratulations.
Thank
It
you.
is such a huge accomplishment to get to a phase of this. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful cover. I mean, were you
Thank
just
you.
absolutely thrilled when you got the box in the mail? And what was that like?
Oh, I wish, it's so funny. There's some bittersweet to this journey, even from the beginning. Annie Blomke, I'm so grateful to her. I've been kind of waiting to send her a copy of the book,
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of reasons, but it wouldn't be what it is, if she hadn't taken me on to represent me and try to get the book published.
I was
She
going to
spent,
say she's your agent, right?
she was my
Yeah.
agent, yeah. And, I think by the time that I decided to go self-published, there was shame for me, like I'd failed,
Oh,
to achieve what I thought I was going to achieve. And so getting the box of books was exciting. And I was upset that it was a little bulkier than I expected. I thought that a 6x9 would maybe be a little more of a
oh,
compact size.
isn't that
Um,
funny? Yeah.
yeah. And so my wife is a graphic artist, and has education there. And so I really trusted her, and she made a beautiful cover, but we didn't realize that those blacks were not quite the same color. You can't see it in any digital representation, but if you look at his hat on the copy you have,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
there's that kind of, you can tell it's digitized.
Yeah.
We were able to
I
fix it.
guess.
But
Okay.
those were issues, I think, in the beginning that just they weighed on me, and I think they still do to a degree weigh on
Mm,
me because I don't have that badge of, authenticity that I publish traditionally. Um, so it's a loaded question, but what I will
yeah.
say is, like I said, I am tremendously proud of the book, and, I've loved sending it to readers like you. I've loved hearing feedback. I would say the defining moments for me have been when it sold to strangers. When I get an order from a stranger to buy the book, you're just like, wow, somebody I've never met
Yes.
and may never meet and may never speak
Yep.
to is going to read this book.
Yep.
And they might leave a 1-star review, but they will they will wade into it and give it a shot.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally feel you on that one.
Yeah,
I think I hear what you're saying about the disappointment with
yeah,
like, oh, I had to self-publish or you didn't
yeah.
have to. You
No,
wanted
that's
to.
true. Yeah,
You
I
you
chose
made
to.
the choice to do
Yeah.
it. So and the thing is, like the whole publishing world is so different now, and it's
Hmm.
just you're
Yes.
on the cutting edge, man. I mean, seriously, I am well aware of many people who make that choice for,
Hmm.
similar reasons to you, a million other reasons.
Yeah.
Um, I listened to another like webinar recently with a editor type person
Hmm.
and was saying the thing that we listen to and grimace about that um platform and this was regarding memoir
Yeah.
specifically. Platform is more important than
Hmm.
writing. So
Yeah.
there are many great writing, books. I can't talk. There's much great writing. There's great writers out there with great books, but
Yeah.
they don't have a platform. And so
Yep.
for that reason, it has to do with sales. And you are, you're doing it I'm taking it on myself and just think you love to learn everything. Think of everything that you're learning about
Yeah.
independent publishing.
I
I
know.
don't mean to be, a
No,
little too
you're
Pollyannish about it.
yeah, you're
But
right.
it's a tough road. People who decide that they want to write a book don't necessarily feel like they know how to distribute and sell things, and that's a whole
Oh,
other camp. But you came from
completely.
the sales world, so you do
Yeah.
have. That's why I also found it a little funny that you call yourself the reluctant
Yeah.
book marketer because
Yeah.
you know what you're doing when it comes to that kind of thing, and you are selling the thing that you know and believe in most, which is
Yeah.
your story, yourself. You're writing your books, so
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with you in so many ways.
the reluctant part is, I think it is still true. And I believe I talked a little bit about this, but I think I got as close to losing my soul as I ever have when I was trying to sell the 7-figure marketing mindset for novelists. Still some great stuff in there. I will do a revamp of the book one day when I actually know what I'm talking about fully. But I would go door to door in Omaha to businesses to ask them to sponsor it into college classrooms, and I thought that was a great idea. And Mike Tyson is widely quoted at this point with this particular quote. He says, "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face."
Yeah, and I've heard that one many times.
Exactly. I know, but it is so true. You walk into the first place where somebody kind of laughs you off and says, "No way," and it's okay. And I've been told no so many times throughout my career in sales. But what I didn't count on is that when it's your book, they're saying no to, the depth of no is so much worse than I was prepared for, and it really did crush me. So, but it was a great lesson. I'm over it now, or I have learned from it now. So,
I mean, it's just another thing under the bridge that you're like, okay, it's another lesson learned. I used to take a yoga class that she was like, you know what, you try, you get in this pose and the person next to you is like all flopped over and you're like, I'm not even here. She's like, it's all just information.
Yes.
And so I always go back. I don't know, that quote has stuck with me so much. It's like, it's all just information. And that's what we can do to, sort of be where we are with the moment of what we have. And, so I hope lots of people buy the book because they should, and it'll be a wonderful continuing series, which is very fun. I love the mystery section because like I feel like I've learned so much because you get to see all the lineup of all the series from all these mystery writers. So there's a lot ahead of you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for stepping into the interviewer chair to talk to me a little bit about my book. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed just experiencing Daring to Tell and everything that you're doing. I cannot wait to hear your interview with Brad Listi. That's going to be so much fun. I have one question for you in closing here is, were you at all surprised by the length of Brad's pauses in conversation? If not, that's totally fine.
That's funny. I don't think it occurred to me when we were talking. She says after a long pause. It's funny because I feel like I felt them more as I've gone back and edited.
Yeah.
Not just less so in his responses in the conversation, slightly more so when he read a section from his book. So I did, play with the pacing a tiny bit there. And sometimes I do play with the pacing with the conversation as well. But that's an interesting question. That harkens back to yet another public radio story. So when I first worked at the station I was at, there was a renowned classical host, very renowned for the pauses that he had in his delivery. And so I guess it's in my public radio, air that I have breathed, the public radio dead air that I have breathed.
Yeah.
The long, thoughtful pause and actually coming from like the Ira Glass school of editing and in interviewing and storytelling, that there's sometimes people don't answer for a long time because you want to hear them thinking for that long. So sometimes you just let it breathe because that's what's happening. So
that's an area where I want to get a lot better as a podcaster. I was so new when I interviewed him that I'd never spoken to somebody with his length of tenure, and it was notable. It was notable the first time I started asking him questions. He would, every single time, he would think before he responded. And I was like, I need more of that in my life. I need more reflection. He's very good at it.
Yeah, so. He is. It was, I was so nervous before that conversation. I have to tell you, I'm sure you get that. I was just like, oh my God. But comes out well, I don't know when this will come out, but it may or may not be out by the time this one is. So
awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. I will have in my show notes how to listen to Daring to Tell. And then you won a prize for an essay. Is it how do people find that if they want to find it? What's the easiest way to find that?
You know what? It's not anywhere.
It's unfindable.
It's unfindable. It does not exist.
No.
Well, actually, that's not entirely true. Here is where it exists. It only exists on Daring to Tell. Okay, it is the essay that I read. So
yep.
I was one of the finalist prizes for the Writer's Digest.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for my number 19 that I came in, they were only printing like the top 10 so I was a little like, yeah, I was like, I am thrilled to be recognized, believe me. But I thought, well, you know what? Then I'll read it on my own darn podcast. So I have read it, and it's the episode called The Wonder.
That's right. I'm going to link to that show specifically because I think it's really fantastic.
Oh,
in my mind, I've got that essay, and then I've also got what you were putting out your newsletter about the chrysalis and the butterfly.
Oh, my butterfly!
What a rich moment for you. That was really that was just peak performance. I loved that whole period of time. So
thank you. That butterfly was like my life when it was happening, and right now we only have buds out there at this moment. In Maine, but the milkweed is looking scary, and I'm like, oh, please let the milkweed come back. I need that milkweed.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We've got a little bit by the Swedish Heritage Center here in town, so I've got to start keeping an eye out for.
Keep an eye out. Oh, those caterpillars—they're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been good. I need to free you from the microphone and let you get back to your day.
I feel like I need to free you, but this has been so much fun, Jody. I will talk with you any day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very, very fun. Thanks for your work. Thank you for listening to TRBM. The theme music was provided by the ever-talented Christopher Talon. And hey, if you liked what you heard, share this show with other readers, because what is the point of telling stories if nobody's listening?
Hey, Exie, I am super excited for you to be working on The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi. So thanks again. The following is the list of pronunciations you were requesting with just a small amount of commentary. Luke Evelyn Mia, mostly known as Luke E. Mia. It's a play on cancer, leukemia. Marva DeLonghi, not DeLonghi or anything like that. The correct pronunciation is Marva DeLonghi. Kapuchnik, as in Lyle Kapuchnik. There are going to be dozens of alternate spellings of his last name throughout the book. It's one of the plays on foreignness where people never are comfortable pronouncing weird-looking last names. So different people spell it differently, and I want you to just pronounce it phonetically like it looks on the page. But his true last name is Kapuchnik. Magdalene, as in Magdalene Bourbon. Vivivica, that's the medication that they sleep with. Nellie Free Titties, that's her stripper name, Free Titties. Borsheim's is the jewelry store, Borsheim's. Felipe Reskov, his name is Felipe Reskov. And there's the familiar names that Reskov calls Luke, like Luke Ivanovich, Lukala, Lukachik. There may be some others you run into in the book, but it'll always be Luke something, and it's not 100% important to me that those are done perfectly, but it is Luke Ivanovich, Lukala, and Lukachik. Millard is a town in Nebraska. Kramer is the name of the crematorium, Kramer. Caniglia's is the name of a restaurant. That's Caniglia's. Mrs. Steffavater. Mrs. Steffavater. Melina. That is Melina. Rinse, shower off. Just kind of like you're taking a rinse and showering off. Rinse, shower off. Petros. My grandpa says they had the best liver and onions in the world, and Papillion Creek. Petro's, and then Papillion Creek. Thanks again for taking this project. I can't tell you how excited I am to hear your reading of the book.